how to learn a language from zero. The question I get basically every single day. I already talked so much about it on TikTok and Instagram, but I finally wanted to make a well-structured video so that I can get into more detail and answer some things once and for all. Hi, I'm Ailey from Turkey. I live in Korea. I currently speak 6 languages, which is kind of embarrassing to say because I have a long way to go with French, but I'm on it. Okay, it still counts. Also, I hate long intros, so let's just begin. I think most people, when they're giving advice on learning languages or practically anything, they always start with saying set goals for yourself. Determine why you're learning the language. But this has literally never been the case for me. At least in the beginning, I can't be like, this is what I want to do with this language. This is where I want to be. I am truly easily bored. Attention span, very short. Goals, unclear. Intentions, questionable. But I think the reason why I never gave up on learning any of these languages is because I have a connection with every single one of them. Or I find something along the way, I never know where it takes me. Like when I first started learning Korean, I never thought I would actually end up here. The thing is, for every language I truly love, at least one thing I consume and fully want to understand and be a part of. You just need to find yours. Because on the days when you don't feel like doing the work, when you're a bit tired, when you're sick of it, that thing you love will keep you going instead of thinking, yes, I would like to speak this language at a B2 level, or I need this language for work. I always suggest a bit more of a chill learning approach to make everything as fun as possible, because once the word study comes into it, I'm out. I am mentally checked out. So maybe it would help people like me as well, but I put languages at a completely different place in my mind. For me, there's studying and then there's learning languages. I do think it's important to keep track of your goals, but sometimes I get super demotivated when I don't feel like I'm reaching my goals, which is stupid because my only goal was just to enjoy the process. So basically, I choose not to have them because they have the potential to demotivate me. Instead, I have my language safe places that brings me an unexplainable amount of joy. And your first job is to find that. For example, with Spanish, it was definitely the music. I actually started learning it because I liked a lot of TV shows from Spain, but I really had a lot of trouble making sense of it. For many months, I just could not register that grammar. I just realized that I wasn't really naturally consuming it. But one day, I heard some reggaeton songs. I didn't even know that genre existed. I was like in high school. The day that I learned that term, the moment that I heard that beat, it was like instant. It was sparks. I said, this makes me so happy for unexplainable reasons. I need to understand this. I need to fully understand this. So when learning Spanish, every time when I was like, fuck this shit, I can't do this anymore, I just blasted gasolina. Shake some ass and you'll be back into it in no time. You just need to find your gasolina, your personal connection with the language. German, for example, a lot of people say that German is super hard, it's super boring, but the times where I was fully focused on learning German were some of the best times of my life. I had so much fun because Germany, politically, socially, economically, it's such a different country than Turkey, the country that I grew up in. So when I was watching their debate show, their documentaries, their news, it was a completely new world to me. I was suddenly able to reach a type of information that I never had access before. Like, I don't even think I can fully explain how it changed my perspective on so many things, how it affected me. I was like, wow, so this is how this society thinks. Although I think my real connection with it is the Turkish influences in the contemporary German art and music. Some of my absolute favorite artists are of Turkish descent. So I felt super drawn to this cultural chaos that I didn't even know existed. I could actually go on for hours about this, but let's move on before I start giving you guys a TED talk about my German rap guilty pleasures. So let's get a bit more specific. Things that I do after I actually decide that I want to learn the language. If I'm learning on my own, I always make sure to download a textbook first. I don't think too much about which textbook because I tend to stray a lot from the textbook anyways. I literally go on Reddit, see what a couple people recommend, and just download it to have it as my roadmap. I usually always skip the alphabet part though. I'm sorry, it's just so fucking boring. Except for Korean though, you can't really skip Hangul. But anyways, it's so easy to get lost when you're trying to learn a language on your own. So I just look at the index of the textbook and try to learn things in that order. Usually many textbooks start with countries, introducing yourself, days, months, articles if the language has any. So I think it's really important to get these basics right. I usually try to repeat as much as I can in the beginnings because the part where I actually start is sometimes very confusing for me, trying to get used to a whole new set of sounds, sometimes a new alphabet. So now that I have my roadmap that I can follow, I have to think about when can I actually learn these things. It will be different for everyone because it depends on if you're in school, if you have a full-time job, if you have the opportunity to take classes, but try to set aside a dedicated time every week, every day. It really doesn't have to be too long, but basically make it a habit. This is the most important part. I want to talk about this more in detail actually because I have so much to say about all the language learning habits that I have. about. But anyways, if you have a dedicated study time, you're always more likely to be consistent. And although how much time I can invest in a language might vary, I try to divide it up as listening, reading. Especially in the beginning stages, this is the most important for me, and speaking and writing. I think of reading and listening as input. The more input that I have, the more that I consume, the more output that I can have, I can produce. Active ways and passive ways of learning a language. It is extremely important to find a balance between the two. And actually, the lack of this balance is the reason why a lot of people will tell you that they can understand so much from a certain language but can't really speak it. So far I have my roadmap, I have my schedule, and now I have certain activities that I can allocate into that schedule. I would probably choose them depending on how much time I have. If I have 10 minutes before going to work, I would probably listen to like a podcast because I'm in a rush, I don't have the time nor the energy to write things down or focus and read. If I have 15 minutes, I would probably do something that requires a little bit more mental energy for me, like maybe writing, journaling in the mornings a little bit, trying to build sentences maybe with the new vocabulary that I'm learning. To give you a more concrete example, my day can look like watching a documentary in my target language in the morning, noting down some new words, summarizing what I learned from that documentary very shortly, kind of writing my thoughts, and then I go to work, come back home. I have significantly less energy now, so maybe I would just like talk to myself. Especially if you're a beginner, it can be extremely draining to try to talk to someone else. It's extremely draining to try to talk to people in general. So I try to talk to myself a lot and sometimes record myself to look back at my mistakes. And before bed, I would take a quick look at my textbook. I try to read a little bit too, but if I'm not that confident in the language, that can also be a little bit more draining for the weekdays too. You can basically switch any of these activities to the ones that you actually like. For example, just because I absolutely detest learning grammar rules and like doing exercises, I usually save them for the weekend when I have more mental energy and clarity and willpower. So this is kind of like the flow I've created for myself. Okay, now that we've figured out what and when, now we need to figure out how. To make the process as enjoyable as possible, you have to find things that you actually care about. Activities, things that you actually enjoy doing. For example, I constantly recommend podcasts, but if you're not into it, there's absolutely no point in forcing yourself. Let's go by each skill. For listening, for example, other than podcasts, it can be obviously music, TV shows, movies, documentaries, although you watch them, really. Figure out which one of these things that you like and just make it a part of your routine. I noticed that documentaries were the most useful for me. There are a lot of things I don't know in this life, and there are a lot of interesting documentaries. I try to choose topics that I'm actually interested in, so I'm kind of like putting myself in a situation where I have to understand the documentary in order to get to the information that I want. So it's like my real goal is to learn about if animals have a consciousness. That was literally the last documentary I've watched in German. And German practice was really like a side effect of it. I watched it to get to the information I want. If you like sports, for example, you can try to watch a game in your target language. If you like cooking, watch culinary shows, which is another obsession of mine. MasterChef Spain, Hukbek Yorisa. Or even better, if you have a show that you already like, just watch it in your target language. It is fairly easy to do that with streaming services like Netflix now. I kid you not, I literally watched The Last Airbender 4 times. In Turkish when I was young, in English when I was in high school, German when I was in university, and then once again in Spanish because I could. For reading, I usually start with children's books, my textbooks, and then I move on to a book that I have already read, but I just read it again in my target language. I learned so much by reading Twilight in Korean. What can I tell you? And then I move on to reading new novels. And news, if you're feeling ambitious. I'm usually too lazy to take notes when I'm watching or listening something, so I usually try to highlight or note down new vocabulary when I'm reading. I highlight it, I write the translation next to it, and usually put down an example sentence. I find them online, but if I can, I also write a sentence that I built using that new word, but sometimes I just can't, to be honest with you. I also want to mention apps like Quizlet, Anki, Byte, because although I don't just depend on them for learning new vocabulary or learning any language, they're actually a great way of taking advantage of spaced repetition. Especially I use Quizlet religiously when I had to learn a shit ton of vocabulary in such a short time for a topic, and I just love how it gamified it for me. So it wasn't boring for me and I was actually able to retain all the information. For writing, I either start with writing super basic sentences or rewriting paragraphs, sentences from my textbooks. Or song lyrics. I really like rewriting song lyrics or just things that I find online. As time passes, as I am more capable in that language, I try to journal a little bit, like talk about what happened during the day. It's a great way to practice past tense. And of course, I try to express more and more complex thoughts with time. If you're not into this, you can try texting friends, getting into random Twitter fights. Like, why do you think I'm fluent in English? I had to defend my boy Harry Styles when I was 13 on Stan Twitter. Tough business. You can also download those language exchange apps to chat with people. I know there are also a lot of weird people on there, but I trust you. Be a responsible adult. Don't do anything stupid. Don't give out personal information. Get the language exchange. Get the fuck out. Because when you're a beginner, even a 3-4 sentence chat teaches you so much about that language, how native speakers text and use that language. Other than that, as another solution, you can have some great conversations with ChatGPT. We love her. I sure had some eye-opening late night talks with her. For speaking, I would also go to those language exchange apps because honestly, it's super easy for me to talk to strangers because I know if I terribly embarrass myself, I can just like block them and move on with my life. Wait, this can be general life advice too. Block and move on, girl. Ideally, you can find a language exchange partner that you can just talk to regularly. That would help you so much. But to be real with you, I was always too lazy to do that. Like, I don't even have the energy to text back to my own friends that I have been actively loving for the past decade. So once again, I would talk to myself a lot. I enjoy these conversations the most. After I had to share a dorm room, I made a habit of thinking in my target language to not disturb my poor roommates. I already disturbed them enough. Thinking in my target language is actually a really strange habit that I developed that helped me so much over time. Oh, for speaking, I also mimic native speakers a lot. Whenever I'm watching or listening something, there's a sentence that I feel like I might use. I always repeat it and try to get close to the original as much as possible. I think this is super helpful, especially for pronunciation, and for me, it also makes things much easier to remember later on. So the last part of this language learning cycle for me is putting everything you learn into use. And that means make mistakes, correct yourself / be corrected, and repeat. One of the biggest mistakes I see language learners around me make is not speaking the language until they know they can form fully correct sentences. They want to sound good, and that's fair. But you can't sound good without sounding terrible first. That's just how life is. Así es la vida, babe. The amount of mistakes I've made and still make, even in languages that I feel super confident in, like English, Korean. You should really see me talk to my friends in English. It's like grammar never existed. My accent, a mix of American and I want to say Turkish, but at this point it's not even that. I lost track. I don't know what it is. And you know what? It's okay. It's completely fine. It's a part of the process. I can guarantee you, when you try to make an effort to speak the language, no native speaker is gonna think, wow, she's so dumb. She just literally forgot the article of the table. Or, oh, how can she not know that word? What was that accent? Etc, etc. It's just unnecessary pressure that we put on ourselves. And yeah, some people are gonna answer back to you in English, but it's not personal. It's not because you're doing a bad job. It's just because some people do that. It really depends on the language and the country and the culture too. But for example, it's a thing in Korea. Like, I'm basically fluent in Korean and sometimes they just answer back to me in English, but it's not because they want to be rude or because they want to say that my Korean is not good enough. I guess it just feels more natural for them. In that case, you can just thank them, move on, find someone else, try again. Wow, it really is general life advice. Also, whenever I felt like I made a stupid mistake, not that I think people will think you're stupid, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I actually knew this. Why did I just say it wrong? Or whenever someone corrects me, I literally never forget that thing again. There is absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about, but I think even for me, I kind of like tie it with a little bit of embarrassment within myself. Like from then on, it's just ingrained into my brain. And so that's why that would be my last suggestion. Make as many mistakes as you possibly can. So that was it for this video about language learning. There are actually so many more things to talk about, so this cannot be the end of it, like me talking about languages on this channel. So leave any questions down below. I really try to reply all of them, and see you on the next one. Good day.